Before, after, before, after.
They turned out to be completely unreliable assholes.
Hello, Tim.
Oh God! Hello, Ryan. You little creep.
And hello, everyone. Welcome
Don't
to... No,
stare
I won't
at
keep
me.
it up.
Don't stare at me. I can't take it.
Oh, those are the sounds of my eyes lighting up. Anyways, I won't keep up that voice for talking to you listeners right now. Welcome, one and all to episode 142 of Dismembering Horror, the podcast true where myself, Ryan McDuffie, and...
Myself, Tim Aslin.
Yeah, exactly. We dismember a horror film for you every week. Every week we talk about what worked for us, what did not work for us, and anything else we found interesting or noteworthy about, you guessed it, a horror film. And we like to dig for buried treasures, and we're all too willing to move past the muck on top in order to do that. It's all part of the fun. It's all part of the process. We like to do it all within the spirit of just friends getting together, watching horror movies, keeping the glory days alive, all in good fun. We do not mean to be any expert or final say. We just like all the conversation that horror movies can spur, the avenues it opens for us, all that good stuff. Right, Tim?
Man, you said it.
Anything else you'd like to say?
No, never.
Right.
I have nothing to add.
Well, we'll see if we'll get you yet. Because, we watched for this week from 1960, Village of the Damned. I swear I had seen this before. I didn't think I had, but I'm pretty sure it was so familiar. But, hey, we're all old enough now, could have seen something decades ago.
It definitely seemed familiar, but my feeling was that it was just that, like, in having watched a lot of, like, documentaries about horror,
mm-hmm.
or even just sort of, like, lists of great horror or whatever, I think I've just seen clips from this.
Totally. Have you seen the remake, the John Carpenter remake?
No, definitely not. I know of it, but no.
Okay. And speaking of horror documentaries, have you watched In Search of Darkness Part 2 yet?
Oh, did it come out?
Yeah, I told you April 26th, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I must have looked like 2 days before that.
It's out. I haven't watched it yet, but I knew you were excited for it, and I am also.
Oh, hell yeah, I'll watch that. I'll watch that with a passion of 1,000 passion fruits.
Great. Me too. My thought exactly. So for today, as I said, Village of the Damned, 1960. We like to start off by watching the trailer on our end. On your end, that means watching or listening to a partial trailer. But either way,
you can watch it in your mind movies.
Thoughts, mind movies. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, Tim, I'm ready for that if you are. How about it?
God, I'll tell you what. I am so ready.
All right, then. Here we go. From 1960, mine and yours. Actually, no. Tim, we aren't ready. Let's say the name of the people who made it first. This film was directed by Wolf Rilla. I had to see if that was an extra I there. And the screenplay by Sterling Silifant, Wolf Rilla, and Ronald Kinnock, based on The Midwich Cuckoos, the 1957 novel by John Wyndham. Here it is, the trailer, Village of the Damned.
Science fiction has never imagined so strange or terrifying a story as that of the village of Midwich, England, cut off from life as we know it by some mysterious force. And later, at one and the same time, a child was born to every woman in the village. Children that grew to look like this. beautiful youngsters behind whose fiery, hypnotic eyes lurked the demon forces of another world.
They're not human. They ought to be destroyed.
Forces put to such sinister use that it became a national emergency.
We are gathered here as advisors, as scientists, as government experts.
Have we established anything about the origins of these children?
There is the possibility of the transmission of energy.
Let me get this straight. You imply that these children may be the result of impulses directed towards us from somewhere in the universe.
What we need is time to investigate. Are you aware of life on another planet?
Wow.
I love how like all movies of this time, all horror movies of this time, they're always literally saying they're the scariest thing you've ever seen. Like every horror movie
horror
that came
that
out
can't be matched.
Exactly. Like, yeah. Well, maybe they're just on a really good string of hits back then. Anyways.
Maybe.
Oh yeah, you wanna transfer that reticence into your rating for this film? Tim, would you tell yourself to avoid it, stream it, rent it, or buy it?
I would just stream it. It never quite arrives at like a thing for me. Like it's all kind of in the same like level. It doesn't sort of suddenly take a turn. It's not like what's the one with the brains that come
that we always talk about? Yeah, Fiend Without a Face.
Fiend Without a Face. Yeah,
I feel like that will forever just be the best like 50s sci-fi horror film.
Arrives at a thing, right? And suddenly you go, whoa! Like we've transferred into another level. This just for me just never gets there, even though it's got cool stuff and I like the ideas that are going on in it. But beyond that, I'm like a little underwhelmed. I think it's fine. I didn't dislike it at all. You know what I mean? Like I was never once like, ugh, ever. I just sort of was like, okay, this is a pleasant, easy ride.
Well, relatively, that can be pretty high praise. So,
yeah, yeah, for me, yeah.
Well, for anyone, for movies in general. Well, I gotta give it a notch higher at Rent It.
It's fair.
Our difference in viewing may be that it started from an elevated place for me. Maybe, yeah, I can see why you thought what you thought. But I just thought the beginning, just as sort of like any great classic Twilight Zone episode or anything like that, it was just it was just so cool. The premise, how it was set up in this visually, really well done way. And I thought we just rode that high the whole movie. And it never really faltered. It was just sort of like, this is the start, and now here's the story of what happened afterwards. So, yeah, Rent It for old Ryan here. Village of the Damned, 1960.
Yeah, that's a good point. It really, to me, it really, really is very close to a really good episode of Twilight Zone. An extended good episode of Twilight Zone.
Yeah. And it's fun.
Right in that pocket.
It's sort of fun how we have this not too far after Night of the Demon, another British-made horror film.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, just pointing that out. That's cool. And other, we've had at Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul, Tenebrae, and Angst. So as far as non-American set-made films from before 2000, we've been on a good string.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm looking at our last little run here. Wow.
Wait, do you have any thoughts on it?
No, I just want people to hear my expression.
This is me reading. I see. Great.
Oh, okay.
Well, Tim, we'd love to hear you say more than all that in the form of a summary of this film.
Oh, the summary of this film is stuffy old dude picks up the phone. Man, that guy. He's so stuffy.
Tim, it's so wonderful to meet you. Welcome into my garden.
With his ascot. Okay, so we're in a little town called Midwich?
Dude,
Midwich.
They said it only like 348 times. Midwich.
Which is in England. And, it's a quaint little village town. And a professor is calling his brother-in-law, who's in the military, wondering when he's coming over. And then he passes out mysteriously. And then we see that everybody in the town has passed out, which is pretty exciting. And the brother-in-law, the military guy, is like, oh, the line went dead. I better go. Maybe I could get off early and go check on them. And when he gets to the threshold of the town line, he's there with a bicycle cop who's on his way in too. And the bicycle cop crosses the threshold and he passes out. So now we're in business because something has happened. And we know that if you go into the town, you'll pass out. And we don't know what's going on. So it's pretty exciting, actually, that opening 20 minutes, I would say, are like very mysterious and eerie and like, creepy. But ultimately, military gets involved and they just, people just they just wake up after, I don't know, however many hours they were out. Quite a few. And so then it becomes a story about like, well, what the hell was that all about? And then twist, a bunch of women, any of the women in town who could get pregnant are all pregnant at the same time, which is very strange. And, husbands and parents are miffed by this because a lot of them were like, I don't remember us getting it on at all. Who'd you sleep with? Hint, it's an alien. Maybe. So, do you like the summary so far? I feel like we're taking a real ride here. So, all the women have their kids, and all the kids that they have, there's all sorts of fun stuff. Let's see. What's one? They develop faster in embryo develops faster.
And outside embryo.
That's right. They grow faster once they're born than normal humans. They're all have platinum blonde hair, small fingernails, and arresting eyes.
They're psychically linked Aryan children.
To each other, right?
Who show no to little emotion or feelings. Mm-hmm. And like to all dress the same and have a power to glow their eyes and sort of force people to do things against their will. We gather...
that's like the signal of their telepathy.
Yes, we gather they have some sort of ultimate plan that involves them leaving town and that their powers are only going to get stronger as they age.
Ooh, we also learned that there were multiple events across the globe of these, of towns falling asleep and waking up with the women pregnant, but most of those towns just killed everybody.
Indeed. And the military personnel crowd, they're debating in the classic military way, sort of the science-minded versus the militaristic-minded. Do we understand, but at what cost do we, should we destroy? And then it becomes a mental feat in order to defeat them in the end. And we never really quite gather what they are, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah, but we do gather that there is a malevolence to them. Like they're up to no good.
Well,
but let's just say that the conclusion by the people involved is that they're up to no good. We don't actually know.
Well, as humans,
Do we?
as humans as we are, they certainly make us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And whether that's denotes evil or malintent in a greater sense, who are we to say? But we will try to say, because we got a lot more to talk about. Are you ready to do just that, Tim?
Oh, man. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think so.
Then here we go. Our first big section, what worked?
What worked? What worked for you? What worked for you? What worked for you?
It worked like a charm, Smith.
What worked? What worked for you?
I mean, I guess since I already mentioned it, I will say the opening again, both as a setup to the premise, but of just like, whoa, okay, this weird occurrence happens. Everyone passes out simultaneously just in this small town. But just how it was filmically done, I just thought all the touches were so well, whether it was like the roaming camera within each house, where it was, and like one of them had, you know, the old crank up Victrola that was then sort of winding down as they were passed out. Just set up. I just thought it was a great setup and just really had me hooked for the rest of the movie.
Did you like it when the jib arm of the crane shot, like pulling away from town, has to like brush past a tree branch and the tree branch like flings back into frame?
No, I didn't notice that, but
that cracked me up. It's a really funny little moment. It's I was like, look out for the tree branch.
Fun. Well, anything else you'd like to add as far as that opening?
Oh
that
man,
worked for you?
You know, it's cool. It's so Twilight Zone-y. I love it. It's just very like seeing how everybody drops mid event, right? Like the lady ironing, which was very concerning to me. I must say, the idea of an iron just sitting on the ironing board, I was like, that house is going to burn down. But it didn't, thank goodness. There's just something really cool and like unsettling about that. And that I agree, the camera work in other than hitting the tree branch, the camera work is really cool and floaty and eerie, and it's good.
Yeah, I think a fun device always, or as a setup for any sort of sci-fi horror thing, is just a sudden like deviation from the norm. You know, and something that's on such a scale, it's great because there's no denying it. You don't have to go through that whole process of sort of questioning some people, proving to the world. You know, there's a lot of similarities to Invasion of the Body Snatchers in this film. I'd say actually overall it's kind of like a Rosemary's Baby meets Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Sure.
But it's different enough in a lot of ways. And one of them is like what I just said, part of Invasion of the Body Snatchers is that ongoing paranoia of trying to convince everyone. In this, it's just the horror of this is already at the inexplicable part. And these stories so often lend themselves to, and you got to love it, especially when it's, a 1950s era type film where the military is immediately involved since it is so well known. So it's this fun, immediate conflict of sort of what we're supposed to look at as the sort of utmost authority on human knowledge and our scientific knowledge and understanding of the world, and the might, I guess, to back it up, the force to back it up. So immediately it's just like stakes are there, stakes are raised. It's cool.
Yeah. There's a lot of thematic stuff too that I think is fun and exciting to try and kind of parse out.
Dude, there's so much in here, and I have it all down that I picked up on. So if you're ready for that, boy.
Well, I'm curious to see sort of what your take is and what different takes may have been, because I feel like there's sort of this broad, it allows for pretty broad interpretation, I think, potentially. Which I think is really good. That's a good thing to have in sci-fi in particular.
I always like, yeah.
more questions than answers kind of thing.
I like to think of it as a broad delving, like interpretation or exploration, because interpretation almost has the suggestion that you can come up with an answer, or explanation. But just as a, we always talk about this in regards to theme, but as simply as a question to explore. Yeah, that's what we want from sci-fi and horror, which is both
totally.
Well, I mean, there's the one I already mentioned as far as like within the military people. And of course, you have that great round table scene as often has them where it's like, everyone tell us your takes on this. And you have the one who's like, destroy it. And then the other one who's usually the protagonist. Now, we can't forgo this opportunity to understand, So I'd say that I feel like there's better ways to put it, but that conflict of like understanding it or destroying it.
There's the term for this. It's hard force versus soft force. Wait, is that right? I know it's hard force is one.
I don't know if you have to use those not too common terms, if that's necessarily a better encapsulation of the theme.
They are common in the military.
Okay, so then
is what I mean.
Got it.
Well, is that right?
What did you think of that?
Sorry, hard power versus soft power.
And what did you think of hard power versus soft power in this film?
Well, so overall the movie kind of has an interesting take on this, right? It in a way, I mean, broadly speaking, in a way, the protagonist is advocating for soft power, for understanding, diplomacy. Like, let's figure it out. Give us time. And that ultimately fails. So in a way, the movie is kind of advocating ultimately for hard power.
For destruction. No, it's really interesting how, usually it's a sort of a film like this plays out where our protagonist is clearly in the right for going with it's so weird, the soft power approach. But no, that's what's so interesting about this one. In the end, he's convinced enough, after the guy shoots himself, after the children seem more and more threatening, to have this ultimate plan. He's like, oh, we gotta do something to stop these kid critters, even though David, I identify with as a son.
Yeah. God, there's a lot. I don't want to go on too many tangents. So
I mean, anything else on that theme? And
I'm trying to think. It's interesting because it's like it kind of comments on it, but kind of is just not really taking a stance.
Here's an interesting thing though. How he, I guess, to kind of jump ahead to the ending, which I loved too. So it basically becomes, since these guys, little kids, read your mind, it becomes a contest of mental fortitude in order to defeat them. In order for them to not let the kids into his mind that he's going to blow them up with a bomb, he just pictures a brick wall. I would say, those definitions are weird. I've never heard of them. But the kind of approach, the scientific approach he's for, of sort of soft powering first, understanding first, I'd say has an association with the idea of a mental approach versus a forceful physical one in order to defeat or in order to overcome or protect yourself, whatever it is. So it doesn't feel like he totally has to go back on his philosophy, but rather use an aspect of it in order to defeat them at the end.
Right. And I think that to me, it feels very much like this is kind of commentary on, this is very common in this era of sci-fi, right? It's sort of, it's pointing out the other ideas of mind control, manipulation, and like that as a threat and an attack from, that like an idea even or an idea can be just as bad as an actual attack. That once they get in your head, you commies, you
Yeah.
better look out, right? And so that kind of stuff, it's kind of in that same vein, and like, how do we combat that? Like, you got to be smarter and sneakier. And in his case, it's like he's tricking them with his intellect, but also using, he's going to blow them up. So it's like he's kind of doing both.
Their sort of emotionless way of being too. It also suggests a kind of binary, robotic, hive mind kind of outlook. I don't know if hive mind, it's right there, maybe in the Borg sense or whatever. But
Right.
I keep thinking about the quote the little kid says, if you didn't, David talking to our hero, the father, if you didn't suffer from emotions, from feelings, you'd be as powerful as us. So like clearly these kids, these alien kids, whatever they are, they have a pretty strong stance in that regard.
Well, and there's also this thing of like, David says, look, just disperse us around the world and let us be, and we'll be fine. Like, there will be no issue. And it's like they don't buy that. But this is a really interesting philosophical thing, right? It's sort of like, don't poke the bear. Right? A bear is not an actual threat to anybody. I mean, it's a threat to its prey. But like, that's a sort of natural order of things, right? Like, we don't get mad that the bear eats salmon. You know what I mean? We get mad that we invade the bear's territory and then the bear goes after us.
Yeah, well,
and it's like, but then we blame the bear.
Well, that's a good distinguishment, because bears are part of our world and ecosystem. Here, it's like they're truly alien, which is a fun too. Like, I don't know if you've up on all the recent Godzilla films. I love them all and had been watching them with Godzilla versus Kong coming out. But in those,
I've watched them.
And in the original Godzillas too, Mecha Godzilla, not even Mecha, just King Ghidorah, the three-headed flying dragon, represents like this is an alien force coming in, and we have the idea that all the other kaiju, the monsters back on Earth, are a part of a natural order when left alone. And I was going to say something more about this movie, but I forgot it.
I think you're saying sort of this natural ecosystem idea, right? It's like, things are not a threat until we mess with them. But then we blame them. And that's stupid. That's backwards. Like, it's just naive, right? Like, it's egotistical and saying like, well, I should be able to do whatever and go wherever I want without reproach from the natural order of things. Like, to me, that's a really interesting commentary. But like, what this movie, I guess, is adding to it, what you're saying is like, how far does the natural order extend into the universe, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're in this sense, they are invading us. It is an invasion story. So we're the bear. They're poking us. But they're almost in a weird way trying to convince us, the way that humans often convince themselves that the bear is the problem. The brood, these kids, are doing that to us. They're like, hey, we're not, like, don't attack us. Like, you guys are just simple creatures. You just need to leave us be. Let us do our thing. Right.
It's as if sort of the scope of the natural order, it's like we can think of invasive species here in terms of like something heading to an island or whatever. But then, exactly like you said. Can we zoom out and say these aliens or whatever coming here are a part of a universal natural order of some kind in arriving at Earth?
Right. But I think so I guess what I'm kind of we're getting to is this idea that was really scary then of, and I guess still is for some people, is the idea of this invader, right? Like, whether or not it's metaphorical as an idea, like an idea can invade your mind, or a physical actual entity that invades your reality or space. Either way, that is scary, and how we debate as humans what the right way to deal with that kind of thing is. I mean, it's like so many science fiction movies talk about this. Like, do you shoot first and ask questions later?
Well, it's cool how his approach to defeat them in the end uses, he does so with sort of these an approach that we do agree with, that he's defending all along, the non-forceful approach in a way. And I don't know if it's ironic or not, but he uses one of their own powers against them, as far as like if they're all about being able to sort of read your minds and know how you're feeling at any given moment, he's that's, how can I put this? Like, that's what he's doing back to them at the end. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He's using his own powers of mind thinking and intuition right back at them.
I mean, from a really, really basic sort of storytelling point of view, they are just doing like your standard thesis, antithesis, and synthesis sort of setup, right? The thesis is the world they live in that gets invaded. The antithesis of that is the whole second act, which is like the upside down world, all that comes along with this invasion. As well as the debate over like what kind of approach do we take when dealing with this invasion. That's the whole, thesis versus antithesis sort of debate, soft or hard power kind of. And in the synthesis of that, he realizes that it's both. Like, you need to use both to defeat this thing.
Right. Which is cool, because then I think there's an example of, we look at these alien children or whatever they are as, okay, they are on the clear end of the spectrum, this one end of the spectrum of what you were just describing. Yet there's a moment at the end that reveals, on some level, are they just as susceptible and motivated by their own emotions and feelings, even though they sort of base their identity on no emotions and feelings. This is from the Wikipedia, describes a moment at the end. David scans his mind, our hero, what's his name? Gordon Zellaby. Scans his mind, showing an emotion, astonishment, for the first time, and that they actually then are kind of like freaking out in the moment right before they get exploded. So they don't show an indifference to not being able to achieve their plan. They aren't like, oh, we are about to explode now. They're upset that they aren't getting to achieve this thing. So I don't know. It's really interesting that by the end, we aren't, because they're so goal focused, it's not like they're these totally indifferent or unemotional beings. They've got some underlying motivation, but maybe it's just more that it's more like, I don't know, an insect one, a not questioning one. It still lacks empathy. Do they have empathy for each other, even though they're all one unit? It gets into a lot of interesting questions.
They have survival instinct for sure.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting, because it's like, where are we going with them? Like, let's just say that they got to grow up. What does that look like?
Right. Well,
and like kids, if we just, because they are kids, right? Like, because of their peculiarness, we're kind of like classifying them as different than kids.
Well,
developmentally, they're still just in the early phase of development, presumably. So what does that say about us or the characters in this movie, how they deal with them, right? Like,
right.
Maybe they're just dumb kids who don't know how to do a lot of things yet because they haven't learned. And humans are like the wrong people to be teaching them anything because they don't understand them.
Well, that's why.
So it's almost like you could get into this nature versus nurture question now.
Or I'd say,
like, there's a lot of weird shit going on.
But like I was saying, intuition versus kind of observable facts. Like when I was saying Gordon uses intuition at the end and to win, what I meant by that is he's willing to trust his own instincts that, if these kids do get out there into the world, it means bad business for the human race.
Well, and I think one of the big moments of the movie, and one of my favorite moments probably, is it sells that, you know, it sells our reasoning to have that intuition when they make a guy shoot himself in the head with a shotgun.
Yeah. But like, we get how it's a threat. That guy was, they know that he was threatening to kill them and he wanted to kill them.
Right. So that's kind of my point. Like, they're reactive. They're not, they don't go out of their way to hurt anybody. They're purely operating on a survival basis.
Yeah. Again, like that.
In all of these instances.
Yeah. Just like Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Right. And so are we supposed to condemn them for that?
I mean, as humans, yeah, they're against us on some level.
But they aren't. They're against anything that threatens their existence.
Okay, you're right. Again, but that's looking on it observably. Like, we know, I don't know. It's like it's on the level of intuition. We do feel that they are here as a threat somehow, and so it becomes a question of trusting that or not.
But that's my point. That's why I think this movie is cool. Is that that is not actually what's going on. We are under the impression that they're a threat because their response to the necessity for survival is all the way to just kill the person who's a threat, right? But if you take the morality of we're like, well, that's too much of a response out of it, they're just operating on a really simple, like, don't threaten me and you won't get hurt.
No, but I'm talking about on the level of when these kids are born, the way they look and make me feel and make eye contact with me scares me. Like,
But that's my point, is that it's hitting a part of your brain that says they're a threat, but they're not actually a threat unless you threaten them.
Right.
Which is fascinating, because humans are notorious for overreacting when something that they don't know or understand comes into their, realm.
Well, and that we're also notorious for basing our life on perceived or the possibility of a threat.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about too, as far as the intuition. Like, when I said, yeah, they make us feel wrong, they make us feel with a threat. That may be true. That's the whole thing of them being children right now. Like, we know they aren't immediately threatened now, but the whole time we keep getting the sense that they do have some sort of greater plan. We're only going to grow more powerful. It's like, why is it so important for them to they have some sort of goal they're trying to achieve. So again, like, I'd say, yeah, the perceived threat thing I was talking about wasn't so much an immediate thing, but just a more down the line thing. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I think all children are a threat.
They are here to take us over, right?
Right. But I just find this whole thing so fascinating, because, like, when you strip away our what would you call it? Is it our emotional, I don't know what you would call it actually, but, like, it's conditioning. So we're having this conditioned response to these kids because they're different, and it's weird, like, where'd they come from? The mystery of it is triggering a part of our brains that instead of which the professor guy kind of tries to do, he's like, well, maybe we should give them a chance. Like, let's figure it out. But the instinct, that the response that we're having is so strong, of like, oh, that's weird and different, and I'm afraid of that thing. So therefore I should be, at least on the defense.
Well, that's what
against it.
I love so much about, you mentioned in the summary that there are these other instances of on the same day where these children cropped up. There was the same birth, immaculate conception, or whatever you want to call it. But just that, like, okay, it just gives a different perspective on, okay, there's whatever this town did of letting them live, it's immediately put into question if they did do the right thing or not. Because you have, like, I like specifically the example when they say in some Inuit culture, they immediately were like, we're getting rid of these.
Because it can't, yeah. But they literally say, like, you can't have these blonde babies from dark-haired, women.
Right.
Which is like,
But, though, but I mean, I'm sure, they're, we imagine their culture not being like, because they did X, we are going to destroy, we do have the sense, that maybe they that they're more in trust with their intuition in a way, and that is a more powerful thing than this sort of like, well, don't shoot first before asking. Maybe, because you can imagine like a situation where, imagine this British scientist, our hero Gordon, goes up to an alien planet and like calmly approaches an alien bear, pokes an alien bear by trying to be calm around it, versus like then his Inuit space explorer buddy is like, no, we got to get out, knows, just is willing to trust their intuition.
Yes, I get what you're saying. And I think I'm kind of playing a bit of devil's advocate with this notion, because it feels like maybe the movie's not saying that, but we're kind of getting this sense that it's somehow binary. That it's, you can either operate on instinct or you can operate on like curious intellect. And that neither one of those are the answer. And the movie tells us that neither one of them is the answer. But I also just, it's such a good framework to start looking into that, reality in humans, because like we're constantly doing that, right? Like we're constantly balancing between, the more ancient part of our brains, like I think it's like the amygdala and the, whatever the other one is, and our intellectual brains that are kind of like problem solving and looking and trying to sort of assess risk from a different, less instinctual standpoint, a more intellectual standpoint. And like, that's kind of what you do. Like, that's what we are doing all the time. But I would personally argue that more of the issues in the world come from people listening too much or who are too prone to this, let's call it the caveman brain, leading the charge. Now, does that mean that if you go, that does not mean that a better solution is to completely ignore that part of your brain and only go from a, intellectual standpoint, soft power standpoint. No, definitely not. But there is a balance that has allowed us as humans to evolve and like survive. But also we are constantly taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, right?
Right.
Like,
I guess,
and I think that whole thing is so fascinating, and that's what you're kind of, or at least what I'm kind of being left with this 1960 horror film or science fiction horror film.
I guess the one thing I'll challenge you on there is it feels like the way you put that, you're grouping either, a sort of fear-based illogical feelings and assumptions with the idea of intuition. And it's just kind of like and I think that's where the horror lies for me, because I mean, it's kind of like, I think I was talking about filmmaking with you or someone else and saying like, I feel like it all really comes down to whether something's, a right decision or not, or the biggest job of the director is learning to trust and distinguish between intuition and a more just kind of like, I just want this because, or whatever, whatever decision that's not based, that ends up not being the quote unquote correct decision.
Well, what I'm saying is not to conflate intuition with instinct.
Right. And yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. What I say. Yeah. And I think exactly.
Because instinct is, I would define it, at least, and somebody way smarter than me could tell me otherwise. But, if you're coming from a place that is only listening to, your amygdala, which is sort of this fight or flight processor in your brain, that's more instinct. Intuition, I think, is more a combination, and to this point, a combination of your ability to be in touch with your instincts, but also have enough of an intellect. These are a lot of I words, guys. I'm really sorry if I mess it up. So your intuition, I think, would be a combination of your instinct and your intellect.
Yeah.
And this movie is kind of revolving around the balance of those three things.
Right. It's a real...
And ultimately, they just he blows himself up too, which is cool. So I didn't leave this movie thinking to myself, that was the right decision. I just left it being like, well, that's a decision, and I like that it's like, we don't really, I don't know.
It's a real double-edged coin.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess also I just want, if we were kind of on the ending, and there's plenty of other theme to discuss too that I thought was working, but just while we're on the ending, I thought it was so suspenseful and fun, just in that sense of can he commit to this mind exercise, this like meditation exercise almost of just picturing a brick wall. It's kind of like the Ghostbusters dilemma of don't picture anything you're afraid that it could use against you. So he pictures.
What did you do,
You can't
Ray?
not picture something. So he pictures Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and you think too, and you kind of it's coming when it happens, and you're kind of, well, there's not. So what is he? It doesn't sound very active for a film ending, right? Not very visual. But then it was so cool because then the movie reminds you, no, you can do anything though to outwardly show what's happening, the conflict that's happening, to filmically show it. So it's just fun, like as far as the intense music, the close-ups, the superimpositions, the like him internally thinking. They do find a way to externalize. That's the word I was looking for. Externalize what he's doing. I really like just the way that that's constructed visually in the moment, is in that it's super simple, right? But he's sitting there and we're watching him sweat and like try to focus on the brick wall. And then we get his face and the brick wall, sort of superimposed on each other. And then we get a third layer, which is the clock on the bomb. Or is it I was wondering, was there another clock that it like... Yeah, there was the clock that was just, I think there was one just hanging on the wall, sort of as a reference to the time,
Yeah, so that seems right. It's like we get these layers of visual stacked on top of each other, and they fade toward the final layer, which is the bomb clock. And that effect is really, really cool and effective in... As we reveal visually the final image, that's the realization. That's the kids then are seeing that, and I just think it's really cool. It's like just a simple way to do it, but like as it comes into view, we go, oh no, don't show that.
It's funny as far as just playing off our instinctual side of blah, they're the enemy, get them, and let's outsmart these guys. It's like there's something satisfying in that sense of the moment right before the bomb goes off and the kids realize what's happening, yet they don't have time to escape. That even if they aren't human, they are still bound by our physical world enough that you can blow them up and that they can't run away from this in the 2 seconds they're given.
Well,
but then they
Ryan,
do. And that's so great
Ryan,
too, because their eyes float away.
Don't they? Yeah, exactly.
Did you like shout out to where we rented the Blu-ray copy from Videotech? I love it when they'll write on the their customized shells of their discs, usually the same font as the movie poster. They drew a little picture of like the floating eyes next to the title. It's so good. And yeah, then I don't know. It's fun. It's just so good. It's such a cool, fun effect. And just like, oh, where are they off to next? Were they really defeated? And it's just one of those things too, where it like, it's not quite enough to make us go, oh, they're just aliens. They're just some kind of force beyond our understanding is what it kind of does. They're just floating eyes, floating consciousnesses.
Right. Yeah, it's cool.
It is.
It's cool for what the time in particular.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a like right in that what was it called? The sort of Red Scare kind of era.
Yeah.
Is that the right term?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because this sort of bridges, expand on another theme, bring up another theme topic here. It bridges the Red Scare, but also our coming off of World War II's fear of the Aryan race, you could say.
Totally. 100%. I kept thinking to myself, I was like, obviously them looking the way they do is commenting on that. But I was like, but what is the aim of that commentary? Like, I find it fascinatingly unclear.
I feel like in all cultures, generally, blonde hair, bright eye, it's a less common trait.
Sure.
So maybe it's sort of rooted in that. We wouldn't want to pick, of course, like a race other than white people. There's something unnerving about the fact that they're this just a force of little white children. I don't know.
Well, I mean, let's just as an exercise, imagine that this movie was made today, and it was a town of white people, and the women all get pregnant, but all the babies are non-white.
Mm.
Like the commentary, like to me, that's like, whoa, the deep layers of commentary that you can pull out of that.
Oh, it makes me want to see the Jordan Peele remake for sure.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or even vice versa, even more, which would be even more kind of breaking these norms and molds, is having, I'd love Jordan Peele to do it where it's a black family or black town, and all of the babies they have are white Aryan blonde kids. Like, that is truly terrifying.
Oh, I'm so excited. Whatever his next movie is.
Yeah.
It's been on a good string. And you bet we'll review it here.
But what do you think? Like, I still am not really sure what my takeaway of I guess on a simple level, it's this sort of notion of like, it's like eugenics, right? It's this notion of a master race or a perfect being, that there is such a thing, that they're heightened in every way. They develop faster. They're perfect, like all that bullshit. And it feels appropriate for the time of this movie, and when the book was only written a few years before the movie. To be commenting on that, at least posing this sort of broad setup of these are the players in this story, which I like. I don't need it to be heavy-handed. Like I think that's probably the thing I like the most about the movie, is that there is a very, I think, critical lack of heavy-handedness in it.
Yeah,
which is cool.
Right, they're just strong elements that are there.
Yeah.
That give us plenty.
Yeah, I didn't feel like it was like hammering at some sort of notion about this. It's just sort of like sprinkling it all over the place and letting you pluck out what is meaningful to you.
Right. So there's also the angle. This definitely overlaps with what we were already talking about of the, destroy it versus study it. But from the Rosemary's Baby angle, there's also the do we nurture it or be afraid of it from that angle too. Of it's my I still gave birth to this baby though, and it's interesting to see then the women have their own reactions of, well, it's a baby, I'm going to take care of it, it's my baby, versus I want it killed, just scared immediately and always scared of it.
I mean, and man, that's deep. Like that is a deeply like problematic and troubling sort of thing in human history of having offspring that don't match with the norms that you're comfortable with. Like, what if you have a kid that's deformed? What if you had a kid that has a disability? Any of the above, right? And historically speaking, I don't think humans have been particularly great about, accepting kids or babies that are not quote unquote normal, don't fit into this idea of what a baby should be. And that's a whole nother just really interesting realm to explore.
Well, I could look at it too, and this is really exemplified in the ending of Rosemary's Baby. Think of how, I think the great horror endings, they sort of bring up these kind of, paradoxical truths that we're always bringing up that horror best exemplifies. Because kind of like what you're saying, there are these two extremes of approach that are being wrestled with here, an outlook or whatever. What's so creepy about this conflict of taking care of these children or not is both of the extremes on either end are scary. Where the thought of the pure nurturing this thing that we, whether it's intuition or instinct, feel afraid of or threatened by, that's scary to imagine a mother just totally loving and embracing one of these children as if it is entirely normal. But then it's also just as scary to think of, when the mothers are so quick to just want to kill their own child they gave birth to. Both have their own set of fears. I feel them both, but I could see someone latching more onto one than the other. It's really interesting.
Yeah, personally, the first one doesn't seem scary to me. To
purely nurture one of these kids. Yeah. But you can imagine, Tim,
it seems dangerous, but it doesn't seem scary.
Right. But imagine if, the guy who's get shot in the chin with a shotgun, imagine he had his own whole side of a movie where somehow that's because his wife, purely nurtured and loved a child. It's
so that, yeah. I think this would be a very interesting, you could tell this story really, really interestingly if you shrink it to just one family. Which actually, there are movies like this that explore that. That movie Orphan.
I haven't seen it actually. I put it.
Oh man!
I put it in our hat just to finally see it. That way.
You did? Oh, great! No, it's great. It really does explore that thing. The movie The Bad Seed explores.
I like that.
Right?
I also put in Joshua, which was a lesser seen one from the 2000s about an evil kid. I can't
remember if I saw Joshua, but I know
Sam Rockwell was in it. Anyway,
I think I saw it. Let's see.
Anyway, what were you saying on all that?
Well, I guess I'm just saying that horror films have explored this, and it's I think a cool realm to explore. That's it.
Indeed, this film does just that. So the last kind of theme thing I had down that popped out to me, I'd be curious if you had any more, was, of course, we already kind of touched on it, but the more Invasion of the Body Snatchers angle of a hive mind, specifically being exemplified by children and sort of their comparison to regular children, which is really fun. We get, I love that scene where it's of course, the regular school kids, they can't help but throw a ball at them. And and just, there's, but it's the way too that I think, when we see, I love that scene where it's the shop owner woman and the kids go into her store and the kids, David's like, "You're afraid of us. We can tell. You don't want us to shop here anymore," and she's just trying to, I don't know what you're talking, so obviously we can easily intuit her fear just as well as they can. But I guess the interesting thing I see going on there is when you look at, I don't know if this is all horror movies on some level. This is a take on horror in general, but that on some level, all horror is a fear of ourselves, the darker sides of ourselves, but not even the darker sides of themselves, just aspects of ourselves. Because I think children are exemplary, and we've talked about this in other episodes. It's come up, the idea that children are closer to some sort of unfiltered, pure, in this case, instinctual or intuitive. Maybe you could say they are more in touch with their intuition in the positive sense and willing to trust that more. And then over time, as we become adults, sort of that's squashed out of us, however you'd say. So the idea of kids being born into the world with that already being gone, it's. I think that's where I'm coming from. That kind of fear of self angle. They're like the fear of the adult in us that's killed off the child that's forgotten how to be a kid.
I like that. That is, yeah. It's like you're like, hey, can't you just be a kid? Like it's okay to be a kid. Just be a kid. Don't do this other thing because that other thing's really upsetting.
Yeah, even in that scene I mentioned, like. The little girl stopping the David or whoever gets hit with the head by the ball, that seems like a very adult response to a situation. Like you almost want to see a kid just kind of like, snap back and throw the ball back or whatever it is, act on that level.
Well, and it's interesting. A few of them start to, and David says, "Don't do that."
Right. Exactly.
Which is also kind of like, yeah, there's a little bit of contradiction in their what they're sort of saying, how they operate and the reality of how they operate. And I like that because it should be messy, right? Like it's creepier to have it be messy.
Yeah.
They can't just be robots. They can't just be like, that'd be a different movie, but yeah, it's all of this stuff I think is cool. It does also make me think about, especially that scene is no different than, it's no different than like a scene of let's say, a group of black kids going to a park that is in a neighborhood that's predominantly white. And the white kids being like, "Hey, you don't belong here. Like, get out of here," freaking out over it. And so I think there's the interesting kind of layers of commentary, or at least you can pull out some commentary on that whole thing of like, yo, just because somebody is different than you, you don't have to freak out.
Right.
Like, calm down. Let's stop jumping to this conclusion that because they're different, they're evil, a threat, whatever. Now, in this movie, they're making it murky because they're doing the kids are actually doing things that are a problem, like they're hurting people. But that even in and of itself, that the movie frames the other as a threat, I think is kind of is commentary on this idea. Like, so many non-white European people are framed as the other and like suffer at the hands of these bullshit notions of what quote unquote normal is. And like, I sympathize a little bit with these kids, actually a lot with these kids in a certain way because of my feelings about that construct. Right? I don't identify with the townspeople being like, oh my God, what? Like, they're different. They're weird. Like, the circumstances were weird, and let's just let's just kill them all. Like, I don't identify with that personally.
But what's interesting about it though is how it's not just Invasion of the Body Snatchers where they're outsiders. You can get how even if there'd be more people in the town who maybe would take your approach there if they were just outsiders. But why I think, more people are afraid of them than not is they came from an immaculate birth. It's not as simple as just their others. Like, that's very invasive. The thought that this thing that could or could not be bad came through me.
I totally agree. But what I think I'm saying is that notion of invasiveness that this movie has is just an extension of the notion of invasiveness that many people have. All it takes is one black family to move into a quote-unquote white neighborhood, and that white neighborhood flips out and says, our whole world is being invaded. It's like, calm down. No, it's not, right? So to me, it's smart for the movie to do it this way, to create, or the book, to create this idea of making it this conception, whatever you want to call it, this mass conception, to frame it as something that feels very invasive is still just saying the same thing, right? Like, just because it feels invasive to you doesn't mean that it's inherently bad.
Yep.
Right? Like, it just doesn't. Now,
or is it? Is the thing. That's
in this case. Yeah. In this case, maybe it is. We don't know. The gray area of the movie, I think, is what makes the movie work. But I think all these things, these layers of commentary exist within it, which is cool. And it should, right? Like, that's what we want in horror.
Right.
We want that part of our brain to be like, whoa, I don't know. How do I feel about this? Like, am I scared? I'm kind of scared, but should I be scared? Am I a bad person?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if you can get that percolating when you walk out of the theater, you've done a good job making a movie.
Well, that's why I'd tell myself to rent it. One of the reasons.
Yeah.
I'd also, and I brought up earlier, or I guess last thing I was saying as far as getting at a fear of ourselves. So I kind of, explained the one that was based on around the idea of the children in this. But there's also then specifically the hive mind element that I thought was more prescient now than when this movie was made, of the fear of a sort of collective hive mind being our deciding factor in what to do, and ultimate democracy or whatever, where I think that's just something we're more and more grappling with, not just in a sense of privacy, but in trusting others, yada, yada, yada. I think the internet we are now a hive mind. What is a truth can easily rise to the top as far as morally. What is a fear-based assumption can raise to the top. And then you just have things sort of coming into extremes. We don't know what to trust anymore. But I think, it all does come down to we, a certain level, do have to trust, if we did have a functioning hive mind democratic vision, that, it following that would ideally be the best in the end. But kind of like what you're bringing up, is it A or is it B? Is it this or is that? It's both in this case, blah, blah, blah. But, it's just that makes it all difficult to kind of step into fully and trustworthy when we've only been, as humans, based our world on a lack of trust, or an assumption that we can't trust in order to survive, which is how we've gotten as far as we have. But now I feel like this is the sort of, I guess, evolutionary, one of the ways, points we're at that sort of can be exemplified with this acceptance of we're a hive mind now. And I mean, and then it gets so tricky because it's complicated by, the companies that enable that hive mind, the technology itself, are, deeply dysfunctional, functional, in the Facebooks, the Googles, and sort of, the profit motivated, and whom they were made by, all that stuff. So But we can see where, I don't know. And then I don't know. There's so much going on with that too. Like, I don't know if this is directly connected, but as far as the hive mind stuff, like I always will get in debates with people about how you look out on the road and all cars are white, black, or a shade of gray, or like, and then some are a very dull color, and then very few and far between you have a brightly colored car. And you have people go like, yeah, well, it's because statistically, this car is I want to, but then it's like, but I don't know, that's weird to me too, like on a certain level. So even if you did want like a bright yellow car or whatever, as something that you would enjoy more in life, like, it's just sort of, I don't know. It's an easier, not big example. It only comes down to a parking ticket or whatever, getting pulled over. But anyway, I don't know. Just hive mind, man. It offers up a lot, especially nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I've sort of, this would be a long conversation to go down that rabbit hole.
Well, can you think of anything that's...
I wouldn't necessarily... I get what you're saying. I wouldn't frame it as... I think there's some categories that do fall closer into this notion of hive mind, or like, people are swayed by the general... They just fall in line with it, with things, because they're so easily kind of convinced based on comfort, based on norms, based on... how things are posed to make them feel more threatened or less threatened. And many people operate within those parameters of like, does this seem threatening or not? And they can be convinced easily.
Right.
Because of that, one way or the other. They're just susceptible to suggestion.
Here's another example though. Like, I think what can be scary. To what extent is, I mean, maybe if we were disagreeing at all as far as like intuition, instinct, to what extent, what is what at any given moment. I do think there is a reticence to trust what could be a good intuition a lot, in our culture.
We know that that's
right.
True.
And so like
scientifically, that's been studied. Right. So that for sure.
So I think that can explain an interesting thing where like, okay. Like, we think it's so cool, and it is so neat how a flock of birds or a group of fish, you do see they move in a hive mind way. It feels like somehow they do operate as one. They aren't thinking about it, right?
Right.
And I think we see that in humans, whether it's like an improvisational, jazz song, or let's say like a play in baseball or something that just like goes off really well. Everyone is just tuned in, it's an example, and we get excited because it is when just humans are plugging into what you could say an intuitive hive mind way of doing things.
Or on the less positive side, you see these experiments or trolling, if you will. Sometimes that's what all it is, of like, somebody walking up to you. All it takes is like two people to walk up to a closed door and stand in front of it to acting like they're waiting for something. Yeah. And people will line up behind them without having any idea what's going on. So we are really susceptible to just like going along with things because we don't want to be the one left out. Right. And that's a really cool thing. Consensus sort of plays this large role of like how do you form consensus within groups and the power of the group consensus.
That's why I really like Wikipedia. It's cool. It is like a group consensus encyclopedia.
Yeah. But it can often be used
right
in a malevolent way. Like, it's really interesting stuff.
Maybe you can better than I can where my brain's at right now, but can you tie this back to this film for us and what worked about it for you?
The hive mind. Yeah. I think it's a cool, unnatural element to put into a monster, let's say. Because as much as we think, especially people who were born and raised in the U.S., we have this notion that individualism is how we operate, and that's really paramount to things. Or at least we maybe not have a notion, but a lot of people have bought into that way of looking at, their identity. And so it's really scary to think, oh my God, what if I didn't have autonomy? Right? And so when you see it personified, like in this movie, it triggers that same response of like, oh, I don't like that. Like,
right.
That's unsettling. That's creepy. So it's a genius way to create a monster.
I think that's a great way of looking at it. And I think, another way to sum up what you're saying is, we like that example of birds and fish I gave, and then us, like the fact that we're so separate from nature that we think of them as this weird, like we're just animals too. Like who's, it's just, we have this other stuff that gets in the way, but it's just,
well, and we're also we're so arrogant about how we think we fit into the natural order of things, that we're somehow above moving as a collective.
Right.
Because then we would just be, quote unquote, these are in air quotes, this word, sheeple. We don't want to be the sheeple. And it's like,
I hate that word.
I know, I do too. It's like, dude, just calm down. That's not what's going on. Right? Like, there are levers in place that are being pulled by lots of different entities that are driving these things.
I don't like this. I mean, I just don't like how the word sounds, and I don't like the comparison to animals as a negative thing, and I don't like the sort of suggestion of that there's like a puppet master and then the quote unquote sheeple. But like, hey, though, there's something to the idea, like in Metropolis, when it cuts between literal sheep and all the people marching in gray in and out of the factory, I get the appeal at the same time.
But here's the thing. The reason we have a problem with the notion, you have to take a step back to understand that the only reason sheep move in a herd the way they do is because humans put them in a cage, like in a pen, and force them to be on like threatened space. And so they have to coalesce together for their own protection and move together in that particular example, right? Like, so
Tim, that's beautiful. It's not the pen, it's the sheep. I mean, no, sorry, opposite. It's not the sheep, it's the pen.
Yes. Exactly.
Which then, right? Like, I don't know. Now just to go even further from this film in a way, I think that's what's so important, is separating when we're sort of diagnosing the ills of the world, is to always look at it as the most underlying thing as possible, as far as like our pen that we've built for ourselves, and not the specific sheep in this comparison. Is I will use it in this instance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the cool thing, I think, ultimately, since I feel like we've moved away from the movie enough, the cool thing is that you watch this movie and this is the conversation that you have, right? Like, that's a pretty big testament to the movie operating on a level that's worthwhile. So, good job, Village of the Damned,
1960
by Wolf Rilla.
Or even more credit to John Wyndham, the author of the 1957 novel. So
I kind of want to read that, actually.
It'd be cool. So just a few last things, just the movie itself that we didn't get to, moments, aspects. Thought it was really well how they portrayed the passage of time, where it just felt smooth and natural. And we just kind of caught up with it well, whether it was 3 months later, 3 years later. It never felt like it got confusing or was going too fast or too slow. It was really cool how that was all handled. Really well done. Anything on that, or can I keep going here?
Keep going. I have a few moments, but that I think were really cool.
I thought was really effective too was their development being sped up was only a slight like sped up. It was just at that level where it was like, for some reason, it's not so crazy, like everyone's freaking out, but at the same time, it's totally justifiable to be freaking out because it's like, you know, a 3-month difference versus, you know, a 0, you know, whatever it is. It was like just those numbers were slight enough just to kind of strike this interesting point of like, this could feel like just an aberration, but also not at all. Right. There's something clearly unnerving about this. It really hit a sweet spot in that balance, I thought. And then lastly, what I had was just like, man, I was talking about just setting everything up well. The first time we see on the screen any of the children, or I was going to say children of the damned, any of the children of the village of the damned, or you could say the damned, it's this, we see, I guess, David as a toddler, and just the casting of that little kid with that mane of blonde hair, just they cast the kid with the perfect gaze. You could say like, I could say that for all the kids in this movie too. Great kid casting, but just something specifically about having a toddler just with the kind of gaze that they had and however they elicited the performance, if you want to even call it that, when they're that young, super affecting, worked out great. Serendipity was on your side, guys. Yeah.
A few just moments that I really loved. I loved I love that when he sends the pilot, you know, there's a plane flying overhead. He's like, "Hey, okay, so, you know, when you get over the town, ease yourself down, but the second you start to feel anything weird, pull up." And it just like fails horribly. The guy crashes and dies. And it's just like, it's just such a good moment of like, oh, we're in over our heads here. Like, and they don't, I mean, the guy, he looks sad and, you know, upset that he made that mistake, but it's sort of weirdly just brushed aside. And then people start waking up like almost immediately after that. I'm like, oh, what a bummer. That pilot really got a raw deal.
Yeah. Canary in the coal mine.
If he had just waited like a couple more minutes, he probably would have been fine.
Just a peg in the military, right?
That's right. I also really love the scene when the wife has her flip out, and I don't quite understand it. Do you remember this where she's like the kid? So David has like,
wait, sorry, you're still on what worked, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
No, I love this. So David rejects the milk, right? She heated up the milk, and she thinks that she overheated it, and that's why he rejected it. And then it like broke on the ground, but she's having a flip out, like a full on flip out. She's like jamming her hand into the heated water that the milk was in. Like, it makes no sense, but it's crazy. And like, there's something so frantic and just over the top about it that I love. I mean, to the point where, not that I love this, but like, you know, to the era, the husband comes in and literally has to slap her out of it. He's like, he does the whole like quintessential, like, get a hold of yourself woman kind of thing.
And how the movie,
it's just such a scene.
Right. And it was so crazy to see where it was like the movie was just totally treating that slap as justified. It was very interesting to see that perspective play out.
God. Yeah.
But you're right. As a memorable moment, certainly works, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah. My favorite moment I already mentioned is the shotgun moment. I mean, it's just so like, oh no. Oh no.
Something so satisfying, just like in the happening kind of way of just seeing someone lose control of their body and hold a gun at themselves. Like, just.
Yeah, that's scary. And they go for it. Like, they do it. So I would commend them for actually doing it.
Great.
But that's it. That's pretty much it for me.
All right. Well, then, if that's pretty much it for you, that's pretty much it for me, which means we shall now move on to our next section, What Did Not Work.
It's not ready yet.
Seems to work okay.
No, something important's missing.
What did not work?
That sending the pilot in was honestly a worked and didn't work for me. Like,
Yeah, I get it.
because it was just so frustrating. Like, well, I mean, based on what you know, you think he's really going to have a second to be aware and pull back up safely. They didn't start off on a strong foot, the military prowess.
They just watched a dude walk over and immediately pass out. Like, what did they think the pilot was like? What was going to happen to him?
They're all surprised when it happens. Just like, come on, guys.
Oh, man. I mean, for me, like, I'm such a broken record lately, but the main characters, he's okay. He's not a complete, like, asshole, so that's nice.
He's an ascot hole.
Yeah, that's right. But he's just so, whatever. Stuffy old man with a young, beautiful wife. I'm like, I hate that trope.
As far as the stuffy old man, I like that in the story of versus like something unknown. You know, anytime you sort of have a stoicism versus something unknowable, I enjoy that.
Sure.
As far as him having the wife, I'm just like, whatever. I was actually like in the first 15 minutes before we kind of get into that, I'm like, oh, finally we're watching one of these movies that doesn't have to have an inserted romance to it, you know? And then, of course, but then it made sense for this one as far as just having being with a couple who may or may not be expecting a kid.
Right. But I guess the story forces them actually to have her be younger. Because you know, the premise being that only women who can have kids had kids. It's not a miracle baby, right? So she has to be at least of an age where she can still conceive a kid. And so it's a little bit locked in, but then just make him younger. Why does he have to be this old dork?
But she loves that old dork.
He seems like her dad. That's the thing that I just don't like. I don't like that construct of like the old man being like, and it feels weird. It feels cringy and just nah.
I agree to the extent I think there's a certain where the place people were coming from with that kind of thing at the time when putting it in movie form doesn't feel so good. But I'm not, you know, it's like she should be able to, you know, in an outside modern real world perspective, I'm like, well, they should be able to do whatever they want, you know? So it's the sort of the place and time in which it was made and the movie being a part of that.
It's a depiction thing.
Yeah.
You know, like they cast that guy first and they probably worked backwards from there.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just feel like he's miscast in a way.
And at least acknowledge it within the story of the movie then, you know?
They almost do. He says one thing where he is like, yeah, you know, I kind of got married late and like, you know, I had kind of we just felt like we had accepted that kids weren't going to be a part. Like I didn't plan for kids. You know, I'm kind of an old dude. Mm-hmm. Like he makes a comment about it very in passing, but
at the same time, I got why they worked as a couple when it was like, I loved those lines where she put in those like scientific terms, how they were having the kids of like, what, do you remember what she said? I mean,
no.
Do you remember the thing though, what I'm talking about?
No.
Where she says something like I don't you know, when it's like the words for that are purely the scientific way you call something, she says like a da has blah 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 with a blah blah blah, and he like looks at her, you know, goes oh, and he knows exactly what that means, that she's pregnant. It was just
Oh,
It was like
right.
she put
in that moment. Yeah. She
put the like what you would say getting pregnant as like super dorky, only scientists could understand it terms. Yeah, like plants made. Yeah, like exactly.
Yeah, she's like when an orchid germinates or something.
No, but it's like the Orchididis reticuli. I don't something that's
that's right. Yeah,
and I thought that was cute.
Yeah. I think that I think his casting kept me from feeling, well, they kind of double protagonist the movie. And I think that hurt the movie for me. Like having her brother and her husband being these sort of the two lead men, but they don't really interact all that much.
It really could just be the brother, and it's immaculate conception story anyways,
Right.
Or it could be one or the other, whatever.
Yeah, it just didn't feel... It felt like it could have been more cohesive somehow. I'm not exactly sure how, but maybe just a better actor in the lead role.
Well, not to jump too far ahead to things of note, but I know the director, co-screenwriter was like, okay, the script was given to me in a, written from just the United States screenwriter, and I didn't get to do my own pass. So he was allowed like 1-2 day pass to kind of Britishize it a bit. And then he said even then it still felt like it needed more work, but they had to go into production for whatever studio reasons.
So be it.
Well, did you have anything else that did not work for you?
Not really. Everything else just felt kind of fine.
Great.
Like nothing stood out to me. I wasn't like, oh God. Like I said at the beginning, like I never was like, ugh, this movie, like how long is it? Like when is it going to be? Like I never had any of those feelings. It just kind of got on the ride, and when it was over, I got off and was like, okay, cool.
Great.
The ride, Ryan, come on. I got off the ride.
What?
Don't worry about it.
Don't even worry about it. All right, we'll move on then. I won't even worry. To things of note.
Things of note!
This should be interesting.
I loved every time they said midwich. Like hearing British people with that specific British accent say midwich. There's an incident in Midwich. It was so good. It was like the drinking game for this. Drink every time they say Midwich would make me so happy.
Right.
It's the perfect sounding little British town. Midwich.
Yep. It kept making me think of Dunwich, the Dunwich horror.
The Midwich hole. I had a hypothetical for you, since I think what was so cool about, the if you want to call them aliens, whatever they are, they're non-corporeal entities is what they are.
Yeah.
If we're allowed to interpret what their grand scheme was, what do you think the purpose was of making everyone, even the men, pass out in the town?
God, see, I don't know. What could it be? Like, what could it be? Maybe the actual, like, entities, the aliens that came down are, like, really big and scary and weird looking. And it just can't be seen. Like, they can't, like, people would just lose their minds. And so they needed everybody to be unconscious so they could infiltrate, impregnate, and then get out of there.
Right. Just this idea. So no, like as if whatever they were doing could be noticeable on some level by how we perceive and view.
Oh, or although we know that it's not like it's a big beam from outer space, because planes can fly over it. So it's like a dome around the area. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Maybe it's just sort of a protective thing. It's like, hey, let's shut everything down in this space right here so that we can do our thing and leave.
And here's another question: were they those floating entities at the end?
Well,
are they?
I think that's a good question,
right? I guess you know what I'm going to ask. If they were truly born from the inception or conception, or was there some sort of? Are they attached to some sort of mother hive mind figure that was the one that cast this bubble and spell?
Well, they don't seem to care that the extended brood around the world were killed.
It's almost like it's kind of expectant, like all the turtles getting to the ocean.
Exactly. So it almost to me feels more likely that this is just the eggs get dropped and they're on their own.
Yeah. So then that insinuates the eggs got dropped by something, and they aren't the what was birthed themselves going from place to place.
Right. But there's a lot of different ways you could look at this. I don't know. I was just thinking about like plants. To use the same kind of analogy, I guess, sort of, that she was using when they're talking about the plants. It's like the pollen. What if the aliens were the bees? And this is the byproduct of the pollen being dropped from one. Humans are the... This is so random. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm thinking how Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the aliens are the pollen. And then...
Right, but I'm saying in this case, the aliens could be the bees. And they're just taking some pollen, which would effectively be, I guess, another alien. But the pollen has to work with humans. Like, it has to be able to grow into a human child. It's just a modified human child.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, God,
and it's interesting how it's conscious enough to. Are the towns random? It's conscious enough to pick humans, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like it does suggest some kind of unknown intent, and I just think that's an overall cool, like, what brings up that theme we kept staying on. Of how much of a threat
it also
are they.
Implies that it's just little, like, it's alien sperm.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
It has to be, right?
Wait, but it's not even just sperm from alien, but like alien sperm. Where
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's specifically what I mean. They get one little sperm that is an alien that.
Or no, something that functions as sperm but is alien. Like, it doesn't have to be physical.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe the brood part of it, this sort of hive part of it, is that the adult that sent out these sperm is what connects those. Each one that turns into a kid is from the same adult.
Right. Well, I like, we do have, we didn't talk about in too much detail the scene we mentioned of the round table discussion. That's always such a pinnacle moment or fun, always here in these films. But like, they do talk out the possibilities, and one of them says a powerful transference of energy. Like, it's... Oh,
that's right. The whole energy
thing, the idea it's beyond a literal, like, sperm of any kind, working with the women, but a sheer a push of energy, and somehow that something, and then that melded or coalesced with our physical world and the
for
rules
all
of
we
childbirth.
know, it could be an already what's it called, like when a sperm and an egg do their thing, that could be what was put into the women.
Yeah.
So that makes it more parasitic, right? It makes it more like, or symbiotic, in that it's its own thing that needed a host to grow within. That's pretty scary.
I think what it suggests by
it's very Alien-esque,
right? I guess I don't know.
Movie,
I think it's more. I think what it suggests in the idea of bringing up energy is it suggests that it's sort of beyond those kinds of rules or boundaries of like something. It's something not that we can't really, pun intended, conceive of. That's so literal, as our rules of how childbirth work. Anyway,
right? But they do give birth.
They do. Faster.
Yeah, I kept thinking that there are some ties to Ridley Scott's sort of outlook on the whole Alien franchise. And I think maybe I'm reaching, but I don't know. David is the name of Michael Fassbender in Prometheus and Alien Covenant.
Yeah.
And he has that like Aryan thing going on, very like I saw this kid and I was like, oh man, that's so similar to the David from Prometheus.
No offense to all the wonderful Davids in my life, but that name, I wonder if it does have a certain, like it construes a default in a way, or as well as sort of like not biblical, but like in Alien Covenant or whatever those movies are, it kind of does. But there's something almost kind of safe and I don't know, David. I don't know. The name does conjure something. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if Ridley Scott was, this was a movie he liked.
I mean, I think that's why I just put it as I did, where, it could just be like, yeah, there's just something to the name David that just they both happened upon or felt right for their respective stories.
Yeah.
This was a citation needed tidbit from Wikipedia, but nonetheless, I thought it was so fun. The blonde wigs that the children wore were padded to give the impression that they had abnormally large heads.
That's funny.
Yeah. And the last thing I had was we already mentioned there's a sequel. We already mentioned there's a remake, but there's also a sequel from 1964. Children of the Damned. That's why I was saying that. The premise is a smaller group of 6 children, each one from a different nation. Although their powers are similar, the theme and tone are nearly opposite of the one that we just watched. With the children, kind of like in line with maybe what you're interested in, Tim, the children in the sequel being portrayed as sympathetic characters. It pushes that angle.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then, of course, the remake we mentioned was directed by John Carpenter, released in 1995 by Universal, moved to contemporary time period. It just says it was not well received by critics. But thing of note for that one, it was shot up in the area where I'm from, just sort of like the Northern California, Greater Bay Area.
Cool.
Yep. And maybe, I'm always trying to see the John Carpenter I haven't seen for a long time. So I'll probably get to it. Why not?
Yeah, I think I'll come around to it. It's got Christopher Reeve in it. You don't see that very often.
It's true. It was his last movie, big movie before his accident. Rest in peace. Great. Well, do you have anything else for things of note?
No. I mean, the other things I kind of read on the Wikipedia were a little too, like, whatever.
Okay.
Down the rabbit hole.
Cool. Well, that's my favorite place to go, Tim, but maybe not right now. For whatever